Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a very special guest on. We've got Neal Dlin. Now, Neal, you're not only the founder and president of a consulting firm, Choristry, but you're also currently active a VP at Aviso on customer service experience. But that's just scratching the surface of who you are. You've been in this business for 30 years. You actually have played every role that there is to play inside of a contact center, which gives you a very unique point of view. And what I'd love to do is not only know that you've consulted with companies like JD Powers, you're looked at as a thought leader. Maybe you could expand on that just a little bit, because I'd like to have you expand on that short bullet list of background points before we launch into the topic today, which is why are contact centers still fundamentally flawed in 2024?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this stuff. I'm a nerd for this stuff. I think our community is so full of great people and information. I like to share. I like to learn from other people. So if anybody gets anything out of this, I really hope they do. Yeah, I've had an illustrious career in contact centers for 30 years, and I've had every role, as you mentioned. I started on the phones. I was very lucky to work in all these different disciplines in contact centers. If you're just working one, if you're like just a workforce manager, for example, you have a very big focus on those KPIs and those processes. You might want to reduce adherence without consideration of how that affects the employee engagement or coaching or training. And similarly, if you're a trainer, you may want to extend training period, and that might be a really great idea, but then how does that impact service levels and so on? So just having worked in all disciplines across the service center has always been something that I've been able to lean on. And in terms of thought leadership, I always find that one interesting. I do think I am a bit of a status quo challenger. I do think that things in the contact center and many best practices don't actually deliver what we want them to. And I think I'm noisy about that. And I guess that gets me considered, I keep getting labeled a thought leader, and I'll take it. If it opens up the conversation and allows us to think about these things and challenges things, great. I'll take that title too.
I'm going to have you start out right there and maybe critique best practices and industry standards. When you say there's a lot that is fundamentally flawed in context today, we're all ears. The floor is yours.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that certainly when I started in the contact center on the phones, I remember what it was like. I remember I had a single monitor, one system. Maybe I have to access another system here and there. I was trained on exactly what I was going to get. I had a binder in front of me, and I would go to someone asked a question, I could go to that tab and give the answer. Life was fairly simple. And back in those days, the mentality was often that you could hire anybody. And to some degree, there was truth to that, because there was a clear understanding of what you were going to get, what we needed to train, how to navigate the systems. And that's how it was. And in fact, everyone knows this, but contact centers are largely based on manufacturing principles. The idea of an assembly line, a plant, your job is to pull the thing down and create the mold and move it on. Quality comes in and checks for defects. Anybody can do this job. And a lot of the basic principles of contact centers, a lot of the best practices that still remain today and have survived all these years are still rooted in that idea. But that's not what contact centers are anymore. My world when I was on the phones is non-existent. All the stuff that I dealt with is automated, mitigated, just completely eliminated altogether. What happens now is contact center agents are dealing with the unhappy path. They're dealing with something that didn't go right. We had a knowledge-based article for that, didn't answer it. We had a chatbot set up, didn't work. We have a way to do that online on our website, getting a lot of errors, not working, can't log in. We have a two-factor authentication, still can't log in. And when people call in now, they've likely exhausted other avenues, so their frustration level is higher. No one wants to call in. So when they call in, it's something that's more urgent. So they have a higher emotional component relative to that interaction. And likely this isn't the call you get every single day, because these are the variances. These are the things that you didn't expect. So an agent today isn't the agent that I was. An agent today has to navigate an organization, have ambiguity tolerance, Be better at making decisions because there's no tab on the binder. Deal with people coming in hot. People would ask me questions like, what's your hours of operation? It's a fairly benign question. But now it's, hey, why hasn't the money transferred? I have to pay the bill for my daughter's wedding. Very different scenario, very different person coming in, very different energy, urgency. The problem is that we have made many technological advancements in contact centers, but I would say we have very few process and people changes in contact centers. So the things we measure that we deem important, how we measure our agents, how we measure the center as a whole, who we hire, what we focus on in training, all of these things are lost in best practices. And I shouldn't say that they're in a state of transition. So I'm not the first nor the last person to challenge them. And they are starting to change, but largely they're still lost in that other era. And so it's a very broken experience for agents. It's a very broken experience for customers, even if you can check and say, but I'm doing all the best practices. And so that's the conversation I like to stir up and have with folks.
Give us an example where maybe most contact centers have this as a best practice, but it's working against them. Or there's something that's broken that shouldn't be happening. Is there an example you can think of that would accentuate the point?
There's so many examples. Quality assurance is always an area that I'm very passionate about, and it's been going through a lot of change. It's also been going through a lot of change driven by technology, but the fundamental, what is the point of this function? We don't often take that moment to step back and ask that question. So the whole point of quality, there's a few different points originally. Again, as I mentioned, manufacturing defect is a defect audit really in the beginning. But most leaders of today would say, no, quality is meant to ensure that we're providing a great experience. But then when you break it down into the practices that happen and the kinds of things in scorecards, must say the customer's name 3 times or 2 times, must use an empathy statement. And what is an empathy statement? Here's 3 examples. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Let me look into that for you. I'll take care of this for you. That's terrible. And that's not a bad thing to say, perhaps. But as an employee, if I can't assess the person I'm talking to, some people hate when you say I'm sorry, as an example. Some people need you to say I'm sorry. Some people hate when you use their name. You sound like a car salesman. And other people, it makes them feel really special. So hiring really great EQ agents, which again is changing the script of we can train anybody to do this because we can't. Hiring great EQ agents, focusing on the clear objective of we want to have great outcomes, great customer experience outcomes. How you do that has some variability and some decision making. A quality program that focuses on outcomes versus the steps you took. So yes, if the outcome was poor, we can talk about, hey, I think you could have used their name a few more times. But if that's the criteria, then what happened, and it is in the majority of contact centers today, what happens is the agent talks to the forum and not to the customer. And we all experience that. All of us do. We call a call center. And I'll give you an example. I call a call center. They say, hey, thanks for calling such and such bank. How can I make your day better? I'm like, oh, that's lovely. I call 3 more times. Thanks for calling such and such bank. How can I make your day better? It becomes a little bit insincere at that point, inauthentic. And then I say, listen, the website is always a little bit out of sync. I know. I just wanted to find out what the balance was. Oh, I'm so terribly sorry about that. I'm not really terribly sorry about that. I'm not really upset or stressed or nervous about it. I just checking in on something. Oh, don't worry, sir. We'll take care of this for you right away. I could imagine how frustrating that would be. I'm like, I'm not really frustrated. I'm just checking my balance. If you could just give me what my balance is. But I know what they're doing, and they're reading to the form. And they're reading to the form because that form will have a heavily weighted impact on their scorecard. That form may have on the plus side, a trip to Mexico for the top person in the year. On the downside, if you don't make a certain score 2 or 3 times, you don't have a job anymore. Either way, the agent's focus is the form and not the customer. And that best practice and those kinds of criteria take our agents out of the mindset of the person they're talking to, this other human on the other end of the line. And instead, how do I hit this criteria to get my scorecard, to get my bonus, and to not get fired? So that's just like one example, but there's so many. Like, that's the thing about how contact centers have been run. People will say, no, but I have a quality scorecard. Yeah, no, I'm checking for empathy statements. I'm doing every best practice. Great. But if you stop thinking about what is the point and then challenge that and maybe try to reimagine that in a different way, in a way that no one's doing potentially, because no one has all the answers. A lot of these practices are broken. People need to experiment more and try things out more and just stay laser focused on great customer experience, human being, great employee experience, human being. All the rest is just information, not goals. That's where the problems start to happen.
Does that liken back to when you said best practices are rooted in like good manufacturing processes? Anybody can be there, but as long as quality control the steps along the way,
Yeah.
we're going to be all right. What that means is, and there's been a lot written up on this, is the lack of trust. It's the lack of trust with contact center leadership and their agents. That if we don't control everything, we can't rely on them. Right?
Yeah.
And you combine that with AI taking all the easy stuff, and now the harder stuff's going to the agent. Are we in a day and age where we're being forced to hire higher quality agents and train them to think independently? Just a trend that we're on that the industry needs to get on faster?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's not an easy thing. People already have a struggle to hire people into contact centers. There's already a talent challenge for people to bring people in. And now the reality is you actually need to bring in a higher caliber of individual, definitely somebody with higher EQ, definitely training them and giving them and positioning them to make judgment calls and to have more flexibility in how they do their jobs. But the reality is that actually the great, beautiful catch to that is if you actually brought in really high EQ, smart people, paid them well, focus on these clear outcomes and giving them more room to navigate to get there, guess what happens? Attrition goes down. So you're paying them more, but you're spending way less on hiring. Hiring is expensive. Just the hiring process is expensive. The training process is expensive. How about the error rates from someone who's not fully proficient yet? That's expensive. So yes, you pay them more and you focus on great talent, but you actually lower attrition, lower error rates. And it becomes easier to find good people because you become a beacon really in the industry, a great place for people to be able to work and feel gratification, or people refer other people to the job. And then, hey, on the other side, beautifully, your customers are having a better experience. I promise you those handle times come down when you have someone who's really good at working with somebody. A lot of handle time issues that I see, and it's funny because people will have handle time targets and all it does is put more strain and actually sometimes cause higher handle time because you're stressed and you're not equipped and you don't have decision-making capability, and it creates holes early in calls that agents can't get out of, and it gets the customer more and more frustrated, and now you have to de-escalate. It takes longer and longer. So your handle times come down, your customer experience is substantially better. Your first contact resolution is so much higher. Amen to what you said. You definitely need to hire a different agent today. Pay them well, train them on different things, give them parameters that are wider and not so prescriptive. And you said something else that I love, which is trust. Trust begets trust. Contact centers by nature are a mistrusting environment. At least they have been historically. If I'm measuring you on 37 metrics and micromanaging you to them and then performance managing you on them, regardless of circumstance, and that happens. You've got a big contact center, you've got a bunch of team leaders, maybe you haven't properly trained them and given them the tools and empowered them. And so they defer to, hey, this happens, you got a written warning, this happens, there's no humanity and there's nothing circumstantial about that. But you, Steve, could be late as an example 17 times in a year because you've got some serious childcare issues at home that maybe I can work with you on your schedule for, whereas I'm late only 15 times in a year, but it's always an hour and it's every Monday morning because I'm just not being responsible and taking it seriously. So I'm a bigger culprit than you are, but you might be further along on a performance management plan than I am. This is how the mistrust manifests. So all of these micro measures, all of these rigid performance management processes screams, I'm giving you something so important, which is the customer experience, but I don't actually trust you have any decision makeability, any competency to do that for me. So I'm going to micromanage you against these really strong metrics that not only do they communicate mistrust, but they actually hurt the customer experience. And the worst byproduct of all is you start to breed untrustworthy people, because if you're not trusted, you don't actually behave in a way that's trusting. On the flip side, if you trust somebody out of the gate, if you hire really well, which is another thing I can get into, most people don't spend enough time when they're hiring. If you hire really well and you trust somebody and you let them know, hey, I'm trusting you. I know you were measured on AHT in the other center. I'm not measuring you on AHT. I'm measuring you on a great experience. And obviously, I'd like you to be responsible about how you use your time. And I trust that you can do that. I'm not going to come talk to you every 3 days about your AHT. What I have found in center after center to go that route, AHT comes down because people take that trust very seriously when they're trusted. But when they're not trusted, they're looking for the loophole. They're looking for the reprieve. They're looking for that chance to fill in a break because you didn't give them one. You haven't coached them in 3 months because it keeps getting canceled because of SLAs, or because they get off a call 5 minutes early because they don't want to be out of adherence on their break, because you don't trust them to make a decision about maybe being a little late on break because they stayed on the phone with the customer. So yeah, all of these things, I know I'm just totally rambled off way past your question, but it all connects, if you know what I mean.
It connects also to what I think you have as a solution, because you have a methodology that you call the FEALs. And in that methodology and that kind of training, you're actually training the agents to understand cues that they can act on. And if you train in that way, then obviously what you're trying to do is you're trying to entrust more latitude for the agent in what they're doing. So explain a little bit what the FEALs framework is.
Yeah, I will. Just before that, I will just say that it can't be something that you insert in a spot in the employee journey. It has to be something that lives throughout. So first, you're hiring people that have a propensity for what I'm going to talk about. And then you train and focus on it. But then you adjust your goals too, to look for it and measure that versus the things we're used to measuring. And then you use that for recognition programs, and you use that as prerequisites for promotion, so and so. So it has to live across the whole journey. And the FEALs is just one aspect of it, but it's a big one, which is this idea that every interaction we have, just like us today, a coaching session with an employee, conversation with a customer, with our boss, whatever the case may be, both parties are coming in with a set of FEALs. And FEALs, and this is not the proper English spelling of FEALs, so it's not that FEALs, it's FEAL, and it stands for feelings, expectations, attitudes, and limitations. And if you think about every interaction in this context, so someone is coming in and I know where I want them to be. I have a destination feel. I want them to feel a certain way. I want to maybe adjust their expectations to this. I'd love to have them have this attitude. And if they had certain limitations, I'd like to elevate that and get them to a different place by the end. So we have a destination that's fairly standard-ish. Over a longer cycle with an employee, that might be something you gradually work to. But on a customer interaction, it's more of a one-time situation. And the trick is to help people to really understand how to identify where someone's coming from. And sometimes it isn't even a trick to identify. It's just to think about it. I gave that example of someone calling in because the money hasn't transferred for their daughter's wedding. Very different from someone asking about a money transfer that they're just curious because they didn't see it. There's no bills riding on it. There's no spend they have to do. They just noticed that it's taking longer than usual, and they were concerned that maybe it didn't go through, but they have no investment in the timing, but just so much as a curiosity. That's a very different set of FEALs. That same person may be really great at navigating your website, and the other person may not be. That's a different set of limitations. This other person may have called 5 times and had terrible experiences. This first person may have called and had great experience. It is a different set of expectations and attitudes and so on. The trick is to identify that at every interaction, how do you try to assess that? Because the goal of every interaction isn't actually, of course, supposed to solve the problem and be accurate. That's table stakes. That's foundational. But the ultimate goal to create great experiences is to know where they are in the fields and where we need to get them to in the fields. And then you as an employee should have some ability, some autonomy to make choices to do that. And that's where that quality form comes into play, because if it's not built for that, it will actually hamper it. It will actually stop you in your tracks from getting them from this field to that field. So yeah, that methodology is one that I worked in with a lot of clients into training, into coaching interactions into customer interactions. It works in life. It works with friends. It works with family. It's a good thing to be focused on. Hey, I see you. You're a human. You're not a robot. You're not a number. You're not the same as the last person I talked to. I want to get you to the same place, but I have to do that very differently. The last call, I could do it in 5 minutes. This call's going to take 25 minutes. The last call, I had to be apologetic. This call, I have to be social. You know what I mean? Like, it's an adjustment based on that individual.
I understand why you call yourself a chief human officer now. It's really understanding these people as people. You also said that it has to be applied across the board, all the way through to the end where you're actually measuring different things. There's different KPIs. Can you give us an example? Like you talked about average handle times before as a traditional KPI.
Yeah.
What are the traditional KPIs that you're not as worried about anymore in the new KPIs that you want to focus on?
Yeah. Handle time is one that I'm excited to see more and more centers drop off of agent scorecard. It's not that I don't believe, but we don't have to measure those things, by the way, just to clarify. The question becomes, whose accountability is it? And who's focused in it? And how much focus should they have on it? And so one of the ways I like to start with mapping out an employee journey is start with, who are you? Like, who's your company? What's your purpose? Do you even have a purpose? Most companies don't really have an aspirational purpose or vision. They have, we want to have this much EBITDA and be the top restaurant in this industry. And I'm going to butcher this, but Dove has something along the lines of making people feel comfortable in their own skin, which is so different than I want a Flawed. So if that's the purpose, if that's the vision, how do you translate that into the service center? So I'm a big fan of creating service center purposes that support the organizational purpose. I'll give you an example, an actual example of when I was at Sonnet. So I helped launch Sonnet Insurance in Canada, and we wanted to change how Canadians felt about insurance. I can't remember what we landed on the final, but was that, are we care enough to change everything? But the point was, is we were very aware that people don't trust their insurance companies. They don't know what coverage they have. They don't know if they're going to get claim covered and so on. We want to change that. And we want to change what people think about contact centers. We want to change your experience with us in this interaction. And so that changed. We didn't hire insurance people. The organization worked on changing all the language of our policies to layman's terms, to simple terms, so that anybody can understand it. We didn't focus on those traditional metrics. We didn't focus in training. We didn't focus on a knowledge dump and a systems dump. We focused on, here's the kinds of calls we're going to get. Here's the experience we'd like them to have. Here's the product information you'll have to access. Here's the systems information you'll have to use to do that. But the focus isn't about learning, memorizing the product and the system. Those are the enablers of the overall thing. But the focus is, here's what they're calling in about, and here's how the experience we want to create. So it's more of a scenario-based focus. And then when they got out onto the floor, we had a quality program that was outcome focused. So it was more about how defining what we want the customer to feel. So in this case, we wanted them to feel valued and heard and cared for, which are pretty standard. A little bit different there was we wanted them to feel a little surprised. And that was part of our purpose. I work with a high-end winemaker that owns estates in Niagara, and they chose Pampered. So the brand starts to infiltrate into, because they have beautiful estates where you come and you can stay at their hotels and you can do wine tastings and tours. And so they wanted that higher end white glove. So that infiltrates into the quality program. And focusing on that, the question is, do we think we did that? And why? What were the cues we heard? What did we not hear? And by the way, it is hard to run a quality program like that. There's a reason why we shy away from it, because it's so much easier when we have binary questions. Did you do this? Yes. You didn't do it? No. Makes for an easy conversation. You can't dispute it. We're not going to have a, no, this is you did it or you didn't. The problem with that is you're crushing the best down to mediocrity. So allowing them to focus on, I want the customer to feel this way. And what cues did we get to think that if we did? And why didn't we get there? And maybe, like I said, it's using the customer's name, and maybe it's not. So that has to be in support of it. You have to drop handle time, adherence, because I know that was your question. I still never really answered it. Handle time, adherence, even absenteeism. All of these things are important, but they move to what I call outlier management. So Steve, I trust you. I need you to be responsible and not take forever in wrapping up and start playing Sudoku and not actually wrapping up your call. I trust you to make great decisions with the customer. I trust you to be here every day. I'm really going to focus on how great an experience you can create. And I'm going to measure that maybe through the survey, maybe through sentiment analysis, maybe through quality, maybe all of the above. And the only time I'm going to talk to you is when you've broken the trust, or if there's something happening that is out of character. So that's the outlier management. So why you used to have a 10-minute handle time and now your wrap up has exploded? Why is that? And even that, managing those metrics as outlier metrics versus goals, I encourage leaders to look at that with curiosity, not suspicion and judgment. So why is that? Did we launch a change and you missed the training and you didn't realize you can get there with 3 faster steps? So the assumption going in should be that you're not doing anything wrong. And then of course, it inevitably will come out if you really are, if you are being malicious, if you are taking advantage. That becomes very clear in that process. You do not have to say to all agents, I don't trust you to hit handle time, because a few agents may legitimately abuse it. You will manage that in outlier management. So it's changing those kinds of things over and just being really laser focused. What is it? At the end of the day, we're not trying to hit an adherence or an occupancy or a handle time. Those things impact the experience, but the experience is what we're trying to create. And incidentally, things like handle time usually are more influenced by systems, IT, process, operational decisions, missing knowledge base articles, lack of training. Those usually are way more influential in handle time than an agent taking an extra 10, 20, 30 seconds, or maybe even an extra 10 minutes because this customer needed that kind of support. And the last thing you want is your agent thinking about talking to this customer and taking any mind share away to a clock. That should never be in their mind. I think the point is you just want to bring all these things from who you hire to who you train, to what you measure, not the traditional metrics, more the outcomes, to what you coach to and support, to what you build into your recognition programs. And if you promote somebody and you recognize somebody, and this happens in every environment, not just contact centers, it's so critical that you focus on the people that everybody know is great, which again, the metrics, if they're in conflict with that, which they often are, the person who's the best with customers in a lot of contact centers doesn't do so well on quality or handle time, and they continuously don't get recognized, or they do, but so does this person who has great handle time and quality, but really bad customer experience. You're sending this mixed message and signal. That continuity of what you expect has to be live and breathe throughout the whole life cycle.
The focus is, what I'm taking away from this is the focus is training them to handle the customer the way that they think is appropriate to handle them and not be burdened, have the freedom to do that. Because there's so many of them, they're like, you're dinged if you move off the script. You're dinged if your average handle time is going up. And it comes a lot from, I think, also this manufacturing perspective that also because there's employees there, employees cost money, that contact centers are one of the largest overhead costs in a company. So you are a cost center to be maintained, to be contained, to shrink. And that mentality is very different than, no, our goal, our outcome is an experience, because the wrong experience will lose people. Right? We will impact the business in a very negative way. But on the other side, if we can create a positive experience, the word of mouth from that, the ability to cross-sell, upsell, have agents that can cross-sell, upsell. There's so much good that comes out of that. But these old KPIs are burdened by being a cost center or perceived as a cost center.
Absolutely. Leaders are under immense pressure to shrink and to save costs. The irony is these things aren't even mutually exclusive. If you do invest, and I've done these numbers on dozens of contact centers, where if you invest in some proactive things, higher salary, more coaching, higher shrinkage because you have more time for development and things like that, which it has an immediate shock on the numbers. Oh, that's going to cost us more. But I run the numbers over a year. When you do the transformation, the costs actually do come down. They come down for all the reasons I said at the top: lower attrition, higher FCR, lower error rates, let alone, as you were talking about, customer satisfaction is so high. You have better net promoter score. So you have more growth in the business. You have a chance for increased wallet share through upsell, cross-sell. And by the way, people don't even connect these budgets together. But what a massive financial impact the great customer experience makes on the top line. You're just focused on the cost. And it's hard to connect. I get that. Sometimes there's soft benefits, but if you can build that into your analytics and where to place to the technology, you really can connect those dots. You can see the influences of good experiences on advocacy and wallet size. And so to me, it's actually self-defeating both on cost and revenue to focus on those traditional KPIs and look at it as a cost center.
Out of everything that we've talked about here, if there was one thing that you wanted your peer community who's watching this to take away, one main thought, what would that be?
Just maybe it's a couple, but firstly, human. Everybody's a human being. We just don't realize how many times we work that out of the equation in how we treat our employees and our customers. And if you can just keep that in mind, and there's something I actually use called lens statements, which is a set of statements that have to remain true no matter what we do about how that customer and employee feel. Those are lens statements. If you keep that top of mind and let that guide your decisions, you will find incredible results. And the second thing is, don't just think a best practice or everyone else is doing it, or even that you're the top of your industry is a place to plateau, because things change like that. Industries are disrupted like that. New players come in and deliver an experience because they're not burdened by legacy systems, and they actually have a head start because they're building it from scratch in a way. So be proactively thinking about how to be the best, because your today's best is tomorrow's worst every time.
This is tomorrow's worst. I love that. I love that thinking. That's a change management. I always have to be thinking. I always have to be evolving. And I want my employees, I want my agents to be thinking that way too. Love it. There's going to be questions. I know people are going to have questions after this. And would it be appropriate if we gave perhaps a link to your LinkedIn profile so people could get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm a nerd. You can tell because I had verbal diarrhea most of this conversation. I love talking about it and I give freely. I'm happy to share. I'm also happy to learn. Like if people have tried things that are new and they find success, like I'm so excited to learn and geek out on that. So yeah, not just questions, but like just discussion in general. Please hit me up on LinkedIn and I'm happy to talk to anybody about this.
Fantastic. Thank you once again for coming in, sharing all of these insights, having us think differently. I think that change that you were talking about at the end is we have to constantly evolve by thinking and thinking differently. And your shared perspectives have helped us do that today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I enjoyed it so much.